When Uncle Victor tapped a champagne spoon against his glass at my engagement dinner, the room softened into that expectant hush people save for toasts and bad news. The Old Dominion Officers Club had dressed itself in polished marble and military portraits, all brass trim and old money certainty. Candlelight slid across crystal stems. A string trio in the corner moved from Debussy to something brighter. My name card sat between my fiancée's and my grandmother's. The ink still damp where the calligrapher had fixed the spelling of Carson. Victor rose anyway. Broad smile, navy blazer, cufflinks with little anchors on them because he had never served a day and loved borrowed prestige. "To Courtney and Daniel," he said, lifting his flute, "and to closure. I finally sold that crumbling Carson house. Maybe now our girl can stop playing saviour for Grandma and focus on her wedding." Laughter broke out first from my cousin Lydia, then from two church trustees, then from the rest of the table in relieved little bursts, like everybody had been waiting for permission to treat my concern as theatre. Victor reached under his chair and produced a glossy brochure. He passed it around like favours at a shower. Riverbank residences, renderings in clean white lines, glass balconies where my grandmother's screened porch had been in real life, where wind chimes had hung for 30 years, where she used to cool peach pies behind the cane chair no one else was allowed to sit in. I could hear blood in my ears, cold and fast. The shame hit first sharp as ice water. Not because I believed him, because everyone else did. Daniel's hand found mine under the linen tablecloth, warm and firm. He didn't squeeze to silence me. He squeezed like a reminder, breathe first, choose second. I am Courtney Carson. Banks quietly hire me when title fraud explodes and someone needs to unwind 6 layers of forged transfers before the market opens Monday. I run point on document authentication escalations for a state fraud response team. I have testified in hearings where men twice my age corrected themselves mid-sentence when they realized I had already traced their shell entities. But in my own family, I am still sweet, emotional Courtney, the girl who cried at a middle school choir solo and therefore, apparently forever, cannot distinguish manipulation from paperwork. "Victor," I said, keeping my voice level because he fed on tone, "Grandma's property is not yours to announce over dinner." He smiled at me the way adults smile at children who wander into serious conversation. "There she is, our paperwork person. I knew you'd want to make this a process." A few people chuckled. Someone muttered, "Tonight of all nights, Court." Grandma sat 2 seats away, her hands folded beside her plate, knuckles thin as moth wings. She looked from him to me, confusion clouding her face, then dropped her eyes to the table. Victor had started handling her bills after Grandpa died. He had also started answering her phone. Daniel cleared his throat. "Maybe we celebrate the engagement tonight and handle property matters with counsel present." Victor tipped his glass at him. "Counsel? Danny, this family survives on common sense, not lawsuits." He kept talking about efficiencies, adult decisions, future planning, while that brochure made one full circle around the table and came to rest by my water glass. On the cover, sunlight flashed off imaginary windows where my grandfather had once nailed hurricane shutters with his own hands. I didn't make a scene. Not there. Not with Grandma in heels she was already regretting and Daniel's commanding officer 3 tables over. I smiled until my jaw hurt, let the trio play through dessert, and helped Grandma into her coat like nothing had happened. In the parking lot, she gripped my sleeve and whispered, "Did I agree to something, baby? Victor said we were just signing for taxes." I kissed her forehead and lied the way women in our family lie to keep fragile evenings from shattering. "You didn't do anything wrong. We'll talk in the morning." At 7:12 a.m., morning arrived in a courier envelope. I know because I was halfway through black coffee and triaging overnight alerts when the doorbell camera pinged with timestamp precision. 7:12. The courier wore county contractor grey, held a digital pad in one hand and a stiff packet in the other. "Ms. Carson. Signature required." The first line under notice to vacate named my grandmother, Eleanor Carson, as an unlawful occupant of 184 Riverbend Road. The second cited a recorded transfer deed executed 9 days prior. The third gave 14 calendar days before possession would be enforced. 14 days. I called Grandma before I finished page 2. She answered on the 4th ring, breathy, already scared because older people hear urgency long before details. "Courtney, are you home?" "Yes." "Stay there. Don't sign anything. Don't let anyone in without me." The packet included copies, deed, power of attorney, notary acknowledgement, sale contract, and a developer's letterhead so polished it might as well have been armour. Victor had moved fast and sloppy in the exact way men move when they think no one in the room reads footnotes. The deed bore Grandma's signature, dated during the week she was in rehab after her fall, the week she had been sedated so heavily she could barely grip a spoon, much less execute legal transfer language with 2 witness initials and consistent pressure strokes. The power of attorney filing had been rushed through in an emergency batch with a filing clerk I recognised from prior complaints. The notary stamp belonged to a woman who had already been flagged in 2 unrelated irregular notarization reviews, and the buyer was Blue Bank Development Group, a company that had been circling riverfront parcels for 18 months. My phone buzzed with 3 family texts before 8 o'clock. Lydia, why are you telling people Victor stole the house? He literally said, you approved this. Aunt Renee, honey, if this is about grief, maybe step back. You've been intense. Unknown number, likely cousin's spouse. Stop threatening legal action. It's done. Done. Because he said it was done. By 8:40, I was in Grandma's kitchen, the one with yellowed wallpaper and the clock shaped like an apple. The eviction packet lay between us on the table, weighted by her glasses case. She kept folding and unfolding the hem of her cardigan. Did I sign this? She asked for the 3rd time. I slid the signature page toward her gently. No, not knowingly. She stared at her own name, shaky on paper. It looks like mine. That's why they do it this way. She told me again what she'd told me in fragments after dinner. Victor had brought papers to rehab and said Medicare needed release forms, then later said tax reassessment required routine updates. He had stood by her bed while she drifted in and out. He had taken her mail to organise it. He had told neighbours she was resting and shouldn't have visitors. Every detail was textbook elder exploitation. Isolation. Controlled communication, manufactured urgency, authority language, friendly faces at every checkpoint. I called the county recorder's office. Busy signal, then hold music, then a polite clerk telling me reversal review windows were currently backlogged. I called probate intake. The officer suggested family mediation before formal petition. I called the developers listed counsel and got a smooth male voice explaining that sentiment, while understandable, does not invalidate executed contracts. He paused just long enough to add, particularly when relatives get attached. Relatives get attached. As if this were about curtains and nostalgia instead of fraud. By noon, Victor called me himself. You're alarming your grandmother, he said, not hello. She needs calm, not your dramatics. You filed a transfer while she was sedated. Allegedly sedated. She was lucid enough to complain about hospital food. You told people I approved this. He laughed softly. You're the paperwork person, Courtney. People assumed you were looped in. Don't punish me because they trust me with adult decisions. I looked at Grandma through the kitchen doorway while he talked, small in her recliner, blanket over her knees though it was warm, staring at the TV without sound. If possession is enforced, I said, where do you think she goes? She can stay with Renee, or a nice assisted place. That house is a hazard, and everyone knows it. It was not a hazard. It needed paint, yes. A railing replaced, but it also held every photograph not lost in the basement flood of '98, Grandpa's woodworking bench, my mother's high school yearbooks, and the legal centre of my grandmother's remaining independence. Once she was displaced, we would spend months fighting for restoration while her routines and memory unravelled in borrowed rooms. People like Victor counted on that unravelling. They called it practicality when women forgot where they put their own keys. After he hung up, I sat at Grandma's table and did what I always do when panic tries to masquerade as strategy. I made a risk list. If I stayed quiet and tried to negotiate privately, he kept control of timeline and narrative. The deed matured into assumed legitimacy. Blue Bank would seek permits, county systems would absorb the transfer as fact, every day would make reversal harder and more expensive. Grandma could be physically removed before a court even assigned us a hearing date. If I pushed publicly, I could trigger retaliation from family, church, and everyone who preferred conflict hidden. Victor would call me vindictive, ungrateful, unstable. People who had laughed at dinner would call that laughter harmless, and my response, excessive. My engagement dinner would become a prelude in town gossip. Poor Daniel marrying into chaos. I looked over at him then. Daniel had come straight over after morning PT, still in a plain grey t-shirt, standing at the sink, washing Grandma's teacup like he belonged in the house. He caught my eye, read my face in 1 second, and dried his hands. "How bad?" he asked. 14 days bad. He nodded once. "Then we moved today." That is the part most people miss about him. Decorated veteran, yes. Composed under pressure, yes. But his quiet superpower is never confusing politeness with surrender. By evening, the stakes had widened beyond one deed. If Victor's version stood, he didn't just take a house, he wrote a precedent into family memory and county record that Eleanor Carson had willingly sold, that I had blessed it, that older women sign away home and history all the time, and no one should make trouble over paperwork. I knew what that precedent did because I'd seen it in other cases. It swallowed truth in administrative language until victims sounded hysterical for insisting on facts. I printed the filing timeline and taped it above my desk. 14 days to possession, 10 business days to emergency review if accepted, 72 hours for notice requirements, 0 margin for a private war. Grandma came in before bed, holding an old biscuit tin, blue enamel chipped at the rim. "Found your grandfather's warranty papers," she said. "Thought you might need old things." Inside were recipes, church bulletins, yellowed receipts, and keys on faded ribbons. I set it aside for morning, already triaging next steps in my head. Affidavit, restraining request, occupancy protection motion, medical capacity records, notary challenge, chain of title freeze. At 11:48 p.m, I drafted my first formal complaint. At 12:21 a.m, I deleted the line that asked for discretion, because discretion had protected him, silence had protected him, family manners had protected him. I saved the document, changed the subject line, and began compiling a distribution list that would make denial impossible. If Victor wanted this handled like an adult decision, I would give him 1. Under oath, on record, in a room full of witnesses. If Victor wanted this handled like an adult decision, I would give him 1. Under oath, on record, in a room full of witnesses. I clicked compose and addressed the first email to him anyway, not because I expected decency, because record mattered. Subject: demand for immediate rescission / Eleanor Carson property transfer. I laid it out clean. Disputed capacity, suspected forged execution, improper POA use, coercive circumstances, notice of pending emergency petition, and 1 narrow off-ramp. Voluntary rescission within 24 hours before formal escalation. I copied Bluebank's counsel and sent a hard copy for Morning Courier. At 12:43 a.m, he replied with a thumbs-up emoji. At 12:44, another message. "You always did love drama. Sleep." By 9 the next morning, I was standing at the county recorder's counter with 3 binders, 2 sworn statements, and enough caffeine to light a runway. The office smelled like toner and wet umbrellas. Behind me, people shifted in line with tax envelopes and manila folders and that tired patience government buildings teach you. The clerk scanned my intake form, frowned and called a supervisor. He arrived with reading glasses low on his nose and the careful tone of someone who wants me to go away without being rude. "Ms. Carson, if a deed is recorded, challenge is judicial. We can annotate concerns, but we cannot simply undo." I'm not asking you to undo. I'm asking you to flag a potentially fraudulent transfer and pause derivative filings while review is pending. He tapped the counter twice, buying time. There is no automatic pause. I slid the rehab admission sheet toward him. The grantor was heavily sedated. This signature date falls inside medication windows that impair motor control and cognition. Here's the timeline. He didn't even glance down before lifting his eyes past my shoulder. "Sir," he called, smiling suddenly. Victor, in sunglasses and a golf quarter zip, walked up carrying coffee like he'd dropped in to say hi. "Morning, folks. Courtney, honey, did you get lost on your way to work?" The supervisor's smile shrank into neutrality. "This is a family matter, I assume," I said. "This is a fraud matter." Victor set 1 coffee on the counter for the supervisor like they were old friends. "She gets passionate, great heart, tough with grief." My jaw tightened. "Stop narrating me." He gave a little laugh to the room. See? The line behind me began that quiet public rustle. Avoid eye contact. Avoid being involved. The supervisor slid my papers back a quarter inch. You can submit a formal concern packet. Processing is currently delayed. How delayed? 10 to 15 business days. Possession is in 14 calendar. He gave me a sympathetic face that said none of that was his problem. Victor leaned in, voice low enough to sound intimate, loud enough for the line to hear. Courtney, Grandma trusted me. I know that stings, but we have to let adults make adult decisions. I took my packet, looked him full in the face, and said, Excellent. Then you won't mind repeating all this under oath? For the first time, he stopped smiling. Sunday service was worse because everyone there knew my grandmother's hymn keys and my mother's maiden name, and still chose comfort over truth. I arrived early with Grandma and sat her in the third pew on the aisle so she wouldn't have to step over knees. Victor entered 10 minutes later, kissed her cheek like a camera was on him, then turned and shook hands down the row like a candidate. After benediction, near the fellowship hall coffee urns, he cornered me in a semicircle of cousins and 2 church trustees. Courtney wants to drag us into court, he announced cheerfully, stirring powdered creamer into his cup. Because she's upset, Grandma loves me enough to trust me with finances. Lydia snorted into her napkin. Not everything is a conspiracy, Court, Trustee Hollis said. Can't this be handled privately? Public accusations damage everyone. Fraud already damages everyone, I said. Victor raised his palms, martyr calm. She's under stress, wedding planning, work, all that. Daniel, help me out here. Daniel had been 2 steps behind me, carrying Grandma's coat. He didn't flinch. My help is simple. Nobody discusses Mrs. Carson's housing without her independent counsel present. Victor smirked. Independent counsel? In church? Daniel met his eyes. Public place seemed to suit you. Grandma tugged my sleeve then, whispering, I don't want to fight, baby. I bent to her level and kept my voice soft. You won't have to fight. You just have to tell the truth when asked. Victor clapped my cousin on the shoulder and stage whispered, See? Saviour mode. The laughter this time was thinner, embarrassed, but it still landed. I filed with probate intake that afternoon anyway. The officer, a woman with kind eyes and exhausted posture, scanned my petition and sighed. You're requesting emergency guardianship carve-outs and occupancy protection against an already recorded transfer. We can place you in queue, but judges are encouraging family mediation first where feasible. Feasible? I heard my own voice sharpen. She received an eviction notice. She lowered her tone. I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm telling you what happens in practice. Practice, another word for delay. Or outside, I sat on the courthouse steps and called Bluebank's attorney again. He answered on second ring. Counsel for Bluebank, he said. Courtney Carson. Follow-up notice. Your client has constructive notice of incapacity concerns and probable forgery. A pause, then silk. Ms. Carson, we sympathise with emotional strain, but contracts can't be unwound because relatives become attached to family properties. She didn't consent. Your allegation is noted. You proceed after notice. You buy litigation and sanctions. He gave a gentle, amused exhale. Let's not posture. If your grandmother truly lacked capacity, produce adjudication. Otherwise, this is a domestic disagreement. Domestic disagreement. I stared at the granite columns and thought about how many women had been buried under that phrase. When I got home, 3 voicemails waited. Aunt Renee. Honey, Victor says you're threatening criminal charges. Please stop before this ruins your wedding. Cousin Mark. Just let it go, Court. Grandma can stay with us if she has to. Unknown male, probably from church. The board doesn't like family spectacles. Be wise. I deleted none of them. Complications multiplied in paperwork-sized cuts. The rehab facility records office sent me partial charts, redacted where they shouldn't have been, and could not locate the medication administration log for the exact date on the deed. The notary listed on the transfer was suddenly out of state caring for relatives. The POA filing clerk who'd fast-tracked Victor's paperwork denied any memory of expedited handling and asked me, with practiced innocence, whether maybe I was misreading timestamps. Meanwhile, Bluebank moved fast, submitting preliminary permit inquiries and utility assessment requests, the bureaucratic equivalent of planting flags. I counterfiled everything: dispute notices to planning, occupancy challenge to code enforcement, notice of contested title to tax assessor. Each office had its own portal, fee, and tiny procedural trap. Miss one box, lose one day. At dinner, my phone lit up with a group text from cousins. Lydia: Uncle V says you're trying to have him arrested for helping Grandma. Mark: This is getting crazy. Renee: Please remember family. I typed, deleted, typed again, then finally sent one line. Family is not a legal exemption. Victor replied in the thread for the first time. When this backfires, don't say nobody warned you. Grandma read over my shoulder and went still. He sounds like your grandfather when he got cornered, she said softly. Only meaner. That night, she couldn't sleep. I heard her moving in the hallway at 2:17 a.m., shuffling, opening drawers, closing them. When I found her in the kitchen, she was clutching her purse and crying quietly, humiliated by her own fear. I keep thinking they'll come with boxes, she whispered. What if I signed and forgot? What if I did this to us? I held her hands until the tremor eased. You didn't do this. Someone did it to you. She nodded, but didn't look convinced. The next morning, I met with a legal aid attorney I respected for elder cases. He reviewed my packet, drummed fingers on the table, and said what I already knew. You have strong indicators, weak time, and a hostile narrative environment. If this stays private, he wins by momentum. I'm filing emergency ethics and property review. He lifted one brow. Televised chamber? If I can get it calendared. He leaned back. Then be prepared. Public hearings are theatre with statutes. The same afternoon, at the county annex, Victor, coincidentally, appeared again, while I waited to submit supplemental exhibits. He stood 3 feet away, talking too loudly into his phone. Yeah, poor Courtney, he said, eyes on me. Still spiralling. Thinks spreadsheets make her a prosecutor. A couple at the next bench glanced at me, then away. When my turn came, the intake clerk took my packet and whispered, Off the record, they're saying your uncle already has board members convinced this is inheritance in fighting. On the record? I asked. She swallowed. On the record, your submission is accepted. I went back to Grandma's house with a migraine and the sour certainty that procedure alone wouldn't save us. Facts were necessary. They were not sufficient. I needed something that shifted the frame so hard Victor couldn't smile it away. The shift came from a biscuit tin. Grandma had left it on the sideboard where she'd set it the night she found it. Blue enamel, chipped rim, old masking tape on the bottom in Grandpa's block letters. Deeds/INS/keep. I opened it at the kitchen table while Daniel reviewed call logs beside me. Inside, recipe cards stained with vanilla, funeral programs, 2 rusted skeleton keys, and 1 brass house key tied to a faded blue ribbon. Grandma saw it and inhaled sharply. That ribbon was from my Sunday hat in '84, she said. Your grandfather tied it there so I wouldn't lose the spare. Under the key sat a folded document in brittle onion skin paper, tucked between a peach cobbler recipe and a church budget printout from 1991. Title line, Life Estate Addendum, Carson Property, River Bend Road. I flattened it carefully. Dated 32 years earlier. Signed by my grandfather granting my grandmother life estate occupancy rights with a specific post-death sale condition. Any conveyance after his death required acknowledgement by 2 blood heir witnesses in person, in addition to grantor execution. 2 blood heir witnesses. Victor's transfer had none. For a second, the room went perfectly quiet except for the refrigerator hum. Then Daniel said, very calmly, That's your lever. I scanned signature blocks. Grandpa's signature, Grandma's younger hand, and witness lines bearing names I knew. My mother and Aunt Renee, then both. Barely adults. The addendum had never been separately recorded, common for old private estate paperwork, but it referenced the original deed book and page number, and the drafting attorney's stamp was still legible. I felt adrenaline spike, clean and sharp, different from panic. Direction. Chain of custody, I said. Daniel was already nodding. Photograph in place first, timestamp video, then sleeve it. He set his phone on record and narrated each step, military precise. Document recovered from Eleanor Carson residence, kitchen table, from labelled estate tin provided by occupant, witnessed by Daniel Price and Courtney Carson, date time stamp. He used to report to me years ago in a military legal documentation unit, back when we both wore uniforms and argued over evidentiary protocol in fluorescent lit offices at 0200. People hear fiancé and assume bias. They don't hear former subordinate trained in chain integrity. We photographed the paper front and back, ribboned key included, then placed it in an archival sleeve and into a locked file pouch. I called my old colleague Mara at State Archives for historical notary specimen verification. She agreed to emergency turnaround if I sent high-resolution scans. Grandma sat down slowly, eyes wet. "He knew about this," she whispered. "Victor helped your grandfather sort papers after the stroke. He knew." That landed heavier than the forgery. Not opportunism then, strategy. By dusk we had assembled the midpoint package. Life estate addendum scan, affidavit from Grandma attesting no witness acknowledgements were obtained, comparative matrix showing statutory and contractual deficiencies, and timeline overlays of rehab sedation logs with deed execution window. Daniel added his own affidavit, not about family, about records, chain handling, document recovery protocol, and his professional credentials. At the bottom of my emergency request, I added one paragraph I had not intended to write this early. Complainant serves as lead analyst for state-level title fraud response operations and submits this petition in that capacity as expert complainant and direct family witness. I had avoided that line for years in family matters because I hated sounding like I needed to flash credentials at people who should have trusted me anyway. Now I wanted it in black ink. At 8:06 p.m, the County Ethics and Property Review Board clerk called back. "We can grant emergency hearing review on compressed notice," she said. "Given occupancy risk and public interest, chamber feed would remain live." "Televised?" I asked. "Local channel and online archive, yes." I looked at Daniel. He gave one small nod. "Calendar it," I said. "Then you must certify service to all materially interested parties within 72 hours. "I'll serve tonight." I printed formal hearing invitations on plain white stock. No flourish, no legal intimidation font, just date, time, docket number, and required appearance language. Recipients: Victor Carson, Bluebank Development Group and Council, County Recorder Oversight Liaison, Probate Intake Supervisor. Church trustees: Hollis and Bennett, both of whom had publicly vouched for Victor's caretaking. Family members who had repeated his claims. And the editor of the local paper's civic desk, Victor's favourite place to pose beside donation checks. At the post office drop, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, I fed each certified envelope into the slot and listened to the machine stamp acceptance, one by one. Daniel stood beside me, holding the receipt tape as it curled. Last envelope, last stamp. No more private stage. When we stepped out into the night, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I answered. "Ms. Carson? This is Nina Alvarez with the Ledger. We received notice of a public ethics hearing regarding the Carson property transfer. Are you willing to comment?" I watched the post office doors close behind us, glass reflecting me in hard outline. "Yes," I said. "On the record." "Yes," I said. "On the record." Nina Alvarez didn't waste time. "Did your grandmother authorize the transfer?" "No." "Do you have evidence beyond family dispute?" "Yes." "Do you allege criminal conduct?" "I allege fiduciary abuse, coercive execution, and a fraudulent transfer instrument recorded against a vulnerable adult." She was quiet for half a beat, probably hearing the difference between accusation and language built for transcripts. "Will you provide documents?" "At hearing, publicly." "Fair. One more. Are you concerned this damages your family?" I looked at Daniel, at the certified mail receipt still in his hand, like a narrow white fuse. "I'm concerned about what already damaged my family," I said, and hung up. By 10:30 p.m, Victor had turned my single comment into a county-wide brushfire. A church listserv email went out under Trustee Hollis's account. "Please pray for the Carson family as false public allegations escalate." It didn't name me, but replies did. Young people weaponize law these days. Elders deserve respect, not ambush. Poor Victor carrying everyone. Then came Victor's formal blast, copied to cousins, trustees, and 3 people who sat on civic boards. Courtney is unstable under wedding stress and attempting to interfere with lawful elder care planning. Please direct all questions to my counsel. His counsel's letter arrived by email 15 minutes later, attached PDF, expensive letterhead, aggressive tone. Cease and desist for defamatory statements. Demand that I stop harassing business partners. Threat of civil action. I forwarded it to my litigation folder and kept working. At 11:47 p.m., my phone rang from a blocked number. I let it roll to voicemail. Victor's voice came through smooth and almost cheerful. You enjoy your little spotlight. Good. Tomorrow morning you'll learn how quickly spotlight burns. At 6:08 a.m., 2 deputies knocked at Grandma's front door. I was already there reviewing exhibit tabs when the knock came. Hard, official, not neighbourly. One deputy read from a clipboard, Emergency Temporary Protective Directives pending review in an adult safeguard petition filed by Victor Carson. Allegation, I was exerting undue influence over Eleanor Carson for financial control. Until preliminary review, non-essential contact was to be supervised by a court-appointed evaluator. I felt my pulse in my teeth. He accuses me of elder abuse after filing an eviction? The older deputy shifted his weight, embarrassed but procedural. Ma'am, we don't adjudicate at the door. Grandma gripped my wrist. She lives here half the week. She takes me to doctors. Mrs. Carson, he said gently, we're not removing you right now. This just sets temporary conditions. Temporary conditions that did exactly what Victor needed, severed me from direct access, muddied perception, and generated a new docket number with language he could wave around. See? Even the court has concerns. When they left, yellow carbon copy in my hand, Daniel read it twice and swore under his breath. If this sticks for 72 hours, I said, he can argue witness contamination, coercion, all of it. And if the board hesitates, possession date keeps running. Stakes no longer lived in theory. If Victor held control through hearing week, Bluebank could push pre-possession steps, Grandma could be removed for safety, and every record afterward would describe her displacement as protective administration, not theft. At 7:40, my supervisor from the state fraud response team called. Courtney, I'm seeing your name in county chatter. Because my uncle forged a deed. I'm not debating merits. I'm saying opposing counsel sent your comments to our ethics office this morning, claiming misuse of state authority in private litigation. We're placing you on temporary external-facing restriction until review. Not suspension, but close enough to sting. I did this on personal time. I know, keep it clean and documented, but until this settles, no media as state title. The line clicked dead. Just like that, one more credential Victor could frame as tainted. By late morning, Nina's story went live anyway. Emergency hearing set in Carson Riverfront transfer dispute. Balanced, careful, but public. Victor responded with his own quote inside the hour. I love my niece and pray she gets support. By noon, I had 7 missed calls, 3 speaking invitations withdrawn from me, and 1 message from our wedding venue manager asking if ongoing legal controversy would affect contracted event security. It was almost impressive. The speed, the saturation, the way he weaponized pity. And then he made the move that actually mattered. Bluebank's counsel filed a petition requesting the ethics board hearing be converted to closed executive session, due family privacy and reputational harm. If granted, Victor could reposition everything as confidential misunderstanding. No cameras, no public record pressure, no community accountability. I drove straight to the board clerk's office, presented written objection, cited open meeting requirements, elder public interest exception, and pending occupancy threat. The clerk accepted it. Face unreadable. We'll decide at pre-session, she said. When? Tomorrow, noon. That left barely 24 hours. On the way back, Aunt Renee finally answered my 10th call. Her voice was clipped, breathy, like she was pacing. Don't drag me into this. You already are in it. Your name is on the addendum witness line. Silence. Then, I was 22. I signed a lot of things your granddaddy put in front of me. Did you witness that document or not? I don't remember. Renee. Victor says you're trying to destroy him. I'm trying to keep Grandma in her house. Another silence, longer, then a whisper. He says if this becomes criminal, they'll look at all of us. Taxes, caregiving reimbursements, everything. I can't do this, Courtney. She hung up. I stood in the courthouse parking structure, concrete radiating heat, and understood the whole board in one nauseating flash. Victor wasn't just defending himself. He was activating everyone's fear that truth might have invoices attached. The setback landed in layers. First came Grandma's chest pain. Not a dramatic collapse. Worse, small, frightening symptoms that make older women apologize while they're hurting. Tightness, short breath, sweat at the temples. We were halfway through reviewing her affidavit with a neutral social worker present because of Victor's temporary order when she went pale and pressed her fist to her sternum. Daniel called 911 before I could reach for my phone. At the ER, fluorescent lights made everyone look unfinished. A triage nurse asked relationship. I answered granddaughter. She checked a screen and frowned. There's an active safeguarding petition. We need authorized contact confirmation. I'm family. Not enough under this flag. They took Grandma through double doors while I stood in a waiting area that smelled like sanitizer and vending machine coffee, holding a folder she needed and could no longer sign. Hours later, a doctor told us she was stable, likely stress-induced angina, overnight observation. Stable, but hospitalized, not home, not available, not credible to people who confuse fragility with unreliability. Second layer, the document. Mara from Archives called at 5:16 p.m., voice tight. I ran your scan against 1990s notary and typeface records. Preliminary indicators support period consistency, but I can't certify authenticity from images alone. I need the original in hand under controlled exam. Earlier slot is 4 business days. 4 days puts us at possession threshold. I know. Third layer. Aunt Renee signed a declaration for Victor's counsel. I got the PDF by email with no greeting, statement of uncertain recollection, no affirmative denial, just enough ambiguity to corrode confidence. I do not distinctly remember the circumstances of any addendum execution and cannot verify my signature without expert review. That one sentence gave Bluebank exactly what it needed to call my lever contested. By the time we left the hospital after midnight, I had lost direct witness access, lost unchallenged document strength, and lost family corroboration. At 12:38 a.m., I sat in my car outside Grandma's dark house and cried for exactly 90 seconds, forehead against the steering wheel, because there are moments when grief is just chemistry and pressure, and no strategy at all. Then my phone buzzed with an internal HR email from my state office. Pending conflict review, you are temporarily reassigned from active field testimony and external consult authority. Victor had succeeded in smearing the one part of my identity that translated instantly in public rooms. I didn't tell Grandma. I told Daniel. He listened, jaw set, then said, "We still have facts. Facts nobody wants to hear unless packaged by someone they already respect." "I respect you." I laughed, not kindly. That and $6 gets us parking near the courthouse. He didn't argue. He just leaned against the hood beside me in the summer dark, shoulders touching, while I watched the porch light flicker and thought, maybe this is how people lose, not in one dramatic blow. In attrition, in doubt, in one delayed office and one frightened aunt and one overworked judge who picks the easier story because it arrives cleaner. At 2:07 a.m., Board Counsel emailed a pre-hearing notice, limited evidentiary scope pending admissibility rulings. Translation: if they excluded the addendum or questioned Grandma's capacity testimony, our emergency relief request could be narrowed to procedural review only. Procedural review would not stop possession in time. For the first time since the courier envelope, I opened a blank document and did not know what to type. Daniel didn't sleep that night. I thought he was answering emails at the kitchen table. Later, he told me he had mostly been staring at the same sentence in the safeguarding petition and trying not to break something. Undue influence by emotionally volatile relative. He said he'd seen weaponized language before, reports after deployments, statements that shifted blame toward whoever had fewer stripes, but this one got under his skin because he could already hear the county's tone. Emotional woman, protective uncle, paper confusion. At 3:11 a.m., he stepped onto Grandma Eleanor's back porch and called Sergeant Malik, retired now, the closest thing he has to a confessor. He repeated the call to me almost verbatim afterward, while the coffee burned between us and Dawn still hadn't committed. "He picked up on second ring," Daniel said. "You only call this late when you're bleeding or hiding it?" "Neither, maybe both," Daniel had answered. He gave Malik the short version. Fraud, hearing, smear campaign, me locked out from my grandmother's bedside by paperwork my uncle engineered. Daniel told me his voice stayed controlled until he heard himself say, "I told her we moved today," and then it cracked in a way he hated. "Malik went quiet," Daniel said. "You think you failed her." "I think I underestimate men like Victor because I keep expecting baseline decency." "No," he said. "You underestimate what panic does when power is threatened." Daniel told me he had leaned on the porch rail, looking at the yard where I used to chase fireflies as a kid, according to Eleanor. He said he could picture it, though he hadn't known me then. "I've spent years being the calm one," he told Malik. "Unit legal, chain of custody, no drama. People hand me chaos and I stack it into order. But this is her family. Their knives are made for her shape. I can't stand in front of all of it." "You're not supposed to absorb it, you're supposed to stay." Stay sounds simple until you've watched staying fail. There was a convoy incident in Daniel's second tour. Paperwork error on route clearance. His signature on final review. They took the road anyway. No one died, but 2 men carried shrapnel home that should never have touched them. Command said, "Fog of war." He heard you missed one line. Since then, precision has felt like penance. I knew pieces of that story, not all. He had never told me how he still checked locks 3 times before bed, or why surprised loud knocks made his lungs go thin. When deputies hit that door that morning, his body had been in 2 years at once. "I'm scared," he told Malik, and then looked straight at me when he said that part. "Not of Victor, of losing her to this fight, of watching her harden so much she doesn't come back." Malik made a noise, half sigh, half laugh. Daniel said, "Then tell her that, soldier. She doesn't need your statue. She needs your pulse." When he came back inside, I was at the table with legal pads spread around me like a fort, eyes red, pen unmoving. He sat across from me and let the silence stretch until I looked up. "I need to say something ugly," he told me. "I'm afraid this ends with you winning the case and losing your softness. And I'm afraid if you lose the case, you'll decide you were foolish to believe anyone could stand with you." I stared at him, stunned, quiet. "I can't promise outcome," he said. "I can promise presence, even when I'm scared, especially then." My mouth trembled once. "I don't feel soft right now." "You don't have to. Just don't go alone." I reached across the table and took his hand, grip fierce enough to hurt. "I don't know how to do this without armor," I whispered. "Keep the armor," he said. "Just let me carry some weight." By morning, the crisis had teeth. At 8:02 a.m., 2 county investigators and a uniformed officer arrived with an evidence hold notice. Victor had filed a criminal complaint alleging I fabricated or stole the life estate addendum from his family records control. Pending authenticity review, the original document was to be collected for chain preservation, I argued. Politely first, then with citations. It didn't matter. The notice was properly signed. Daniel filmed the transfer. I signed receipt under protest while an investigator sealed the only original we had into a tamper bag and walked it to an unmarked sedan. Without the original in my hand, admissibility at noon became a coin toss. At 9:30, board clerk emailed ruling on Bluebank's request. Hearing remained public, but evidentiary admissions would be strictly limited to verified documents and live available witnesses. Grandma was still in observation. Renee was now uncertain. Original addendum was in county custody. At 10:14, my phone rang from a number I recognized. Bluebank Counsel. "Ms. Carson," he said, almost pleasant. "Given developing complications, my client is willing to discuss private transitional occupancy for your grandmother if you withdraw public allegations today." Transitional occupancy. 60 days relocation support, voluntary move, no admission of wrongdoing. He wanted surrender wrapped as mercy. No, a beat. Then we proceed. At 11:03, another blow, Victor's counsel filed an emergency motion asking the board to disqualify Daniel's affidavit as biased intimate partner testimony and to sanction me for media manipulation. Weak on merit, strong on delay. At 11:41, I arrived at the county chamber with 3 binders now missing their centrepiece. Cameras were already mounted. The mahogany dais looked darker in daylight, stern and polished, built for men who mistook wood grain for authority. Crowds filled quickly, church faces, cousins, reporters, curious strangers who came for civic theatre. I heard my name in whispers, then Victor's laugh rising above them, confident, practiced. When I turned, I saw his final move, waiting in plain sight. Aunt Renee sat behind his council table wearing a witness badge for the respondent side. Next to her, pale but upright in a hospital cardigan over slacks, was Grandma, discharged against recommendation into Victor's custody for family supervision, under the interim ex parte placement instruction tied to his safeguarding petition, flanked by the court evaluator from that same docket. Victor caught my eye and smiled like a man unveiling a centrepiece. The clerk called docket number 2-417 and asked all parties to approach. I walked forward, not knowing for the first time whether the person I was trying to protect would be allowed to stand with me, or used to bury me. I walked forward, not knowing for the first time whether the person I was trying to protect would be allowed to stand with me, or used to bury me. The clerk swore us in. The microphones clicked live one by one, each red light a small verdict against secrecy. Victor sat at respondent table in a charcoal suit he wore to funerals and fundraisers, jaw set in practiced concern. He kept one hand lightly on Grandma's elbow like a stage direction. Board chair Elaine Porter adjusted her glasses. This is emergency docket 22-417, contested transfer of property held by Eleanor Carson. We are proceeding in open session. Counsel appearances. Bluebank's attorney stood first, smooth as ever. Martin Kells for Bluebank Development Group, innocent purchaser for value. Victor's counsel followed. Gerard Pike for Victor Carson, long-term caregiver and lawful attorney in fact. I stood alone at complainant table. Courtney Carson, complainant, direct family witness and title fraud analyst, appearing in personal capacity. Pike smiled thinly. Not state-authorized today, I trust. I met his eyes. Today I don't need a badge. I need a record. A couple of people in the gallery shifted. I heard Lydia whisper, "Here we go." Chair Porter called preliminary motions. Pike argued Daniel's affidavit was biased, my media comments prejudicial, the addendum unreliable because the original was under criminal review. Kells repeated privacy concerns and asked for narrow scope. They were trying to shrink the room before any fact could breathe. When Porter looked to me, I didn't open with outrage. I opened with sequence. Madam Chair, I move admission of Exhibits C through H as independently sourced administrative records, rehab medication logs, nurse shift notes, recorder timestamp report, and notary sequence registry obtained by records request. These documents do not depend on the seized original addendum. Board counsel leaned toward Porter and nodded. Administrative records are admissible for threshold review. Granted, Porter said. I heard Victor exhale through his nose, annoyed but still calm. I connected my laptop to the chamber screen. The first slide showed nothing dramatic, just a timeline with 4 columns and minute stamps. Deed execution is listed at 2:40 p.m., 9 days ago, I said. At 2:12 p.m., Mrs. Carson was charted as receiving hydromorphone and lorazepam in Rehab Wing B. At 2:31, nurse notation, patient drowsy, unable to sustain grip, requests rest. At 2:47, vitals check recorded reduced responsiveness. Kells objected. Capacity is legal, not medical shorthand. Correct, I said, which is why this is one layer not my conclusion. I clicked to handwriting overlays. This is Mrs. Carson's baseline signature from her Medicare forms 6 months prior. This is the deed signature. See terminal stroke pressure drop and letter spacing collapse, inconsistent with her baseline unless heavily medicated or guided. Pike scoffed. She's elderly. Signatures vary. I turned to the board. They do. That's why you compare variance range across multiple known signatures. I pulled up 6 exemplars. The deed falls outside that range. Victor leaned into his mic. Or maybe she was tired. Can we stop pretending my niece is CSI? A few people laughed in the back. Porter banged her gavel once. Mr. Carson, you will wait to be recognized. I moved to the notary record. The acknowledgement is stamped by Notary Brenda Lott, commission ending 2027. Her sequential journal entries submitted to the Secretary of State show entry 881 at 1:05 p.m. across town. Entry 882, the deed at 2:40 p.m. allegedly in Rehab Wing B. Entry 883 at 2:43 p.m. back across town at a shipping office requiring in-person ID. I let the map pins sit on screen. Travel time between those points is 19 minutes with no traffic. She would have needed to teleport. This time no one laughed. Even Pike looked irritated with his own file. Victor shifted, voice rising. Technicalities. The sale was still intended. Eleanor wanted relief from that money pit. I turned toward Grandma, careful. Grandma, did you ask to sell your home that week? Pike jumped up. Objection. She is under safeguarding review and vulnerable to coercive questioning by this complainant. I kept my tone even. Then put her under oath and let board counsel question her directly. Porter looked to counsel. He considered, then nodded slowly. Given competing narratives, oath testimony from Mrs. Carson is appropriate. Pike whispered hard at Victor. Victor squeezed Grandma's hand again. She stared at the tabletop. The clerk administered oath. Grandma's voice shook on her name. Board counsel spoke gently. Mrs. Carson, do you recall signing papers to sell your home? She swallowed. I recall signing what Victor said were medical forms and tax forms. I did not mean to sell my house. Pike stood. Mrs. Carson, isn't it true you told my client repeatedly you could not manage upkeep? Yes, she whispered. And that you trusted him to handle finances? I trusted him, she said, then looked up, eyes suddenly clear and hurt. Not to put me out. The room went so still I could hear camera fans whirring. Pike pivoted fast. You've been under stress from your granddaughter's pressure, yes? Before she answered, Victor cut in, too loud. Eleanor, just tell them Courtney has been pushing you. Grandma flinched like he'd snapped a leash. Something in me hardened to glass. Madam Chair, I said, I request Respondent Victor Carson be sworn for direct questioning on POA use and witness compliance. Porter didn't hesitate. Mr. Carson, stand. For the first time that day, Victor looked uncertain. He took the oath with a smirk, but it sat wrong on him now. I started simple. Mr. Carson, when did Mrs. Carson execute the power of attorney you used for this sale? Years ago. Date? I don't memorize dates. I held up the filing. You filed an emergency POA update 6 days before transfer. Why emergency? Because deadlines. Which deadlines? Tax, development, family needs. Specific legal deadline, Mr. Carson. He glanced at Pike. I relied on counsel. Counsel from where? You had no retained estate counsel at filing. Pike objected to harassment. Porter overruled. Answer. Victor's neck reddened. I got advice. From whom? Silence. I advanced. Did you obtain 2 blood heir witness acknowledgements for conveyance as required under Carson life estate conditions? Pike sprang up. The addendum is unverified and seized. I'm not offering it for truth yet, I said. I'm asking what he did. Porter. He may answer. Victor laughed brittle. No one has ever heard of this phantom addendum except Courtney. I clicked to my next exhibit. Except your own voicemail time-stamped 2 nights ago. I hit play. His voice filled the chamber. You enjoy your little spotlight? Good. Tomorrow morning you'll learn how quickly spotlight burns. Murmurs. I played the second clip, older, from a call I'd legally recorded with one-party consent in our state. Grandma trusted me. I know that stings. People trust me with adult decisions. Then I projected his text from the family thread. When this backfires, don't say nobody warned you. Pike objected to relevance. I answered before Porter could. Pattern of intimidation tied to process manipulation. Now let's talk about witness compliance. Minutes before callback, the board/county evidence officer authorized a narrowly limited emergency forensic bench review of the seized original, and Mara's note was transmitted through county investigators. I requested admission of 2 affidavits that had arrived 30 minutes before hearing. One from Mara at State Archives confirming provisional physical review notes after emergency bench examination of the seized original, paper age, ink composition, and notary embossing all period consistent. One from Aunt Renee, corrected and notarized at 10:58 a.m., retracting uncertainty and affirming she and my mother witnessed the life estate addendum in person in Grandpa's den. Renee gasped from respondent table. She hadn't known I'd gotten the corrected affidavit directly from her after she slipped me into a hospital stairwell at dawn, crying, saying, "He told me they'd come after my son's business if I spoke." Now she stood up in the gallery, voice breaking. "It's true, I signed it. Victor knew." Victor twisted around. "Sit down." "No," she said louder. "I'm done lying for you." Porter ordered decorum, but the damage was done. Board counsel requested a recess for document authentication check with county evidence officer. 10 minutes stretched to 27. When they came back, counsel's face had changed. The seized original addendum has been visually matched to the submitted scan metadata and appears materially consistent pending full forensic report, he said. For emergency purposes, witness condition clause is sufficiently credible. Pike tried one last charge. Even if a clause exists, Bluebank purchased in good faith. I pulled up my final slide. Notice chronology. Bluebank received my written fraud notice 24 hours after eviction and before permit submissions. They proceeded anyway. Good faith ended at notice. Kells stopped smiling entirely. I looked at Porter and made my choice explicit, voice steady though my hands shook under the table. I request immediate nullification of the transfer instrument, protective occupancy order for Eleanor Carson, freeze on all derivative permits, and formal finding of fiduciary abuse by Victor Carson entered into county record. Then, because this mattered most, I added, and referral to the district attorney for review of forgery, coercive control, and elder exploitation. Victor slammed his palm on the table. "You vindictive little, after everything I paid for in this family!" Porter's gavel cracked sharp. "Mr. Carson, one more outburst and you'll be removed." He stood anyway, pointing at me. "She's destroying all of us over a shack." I stood too. "No, Victor, I'm ending what you built on our silence." The vote wasn't dramatic. It was worse for him. Methodical. Board member Shah read first finding into the mic. By preponderance and emergency risk standard, execution validity is materially compromised. Member Ruiz. Life estate witness condition appears unmet. Member Han. Respondent behaviour demonstrates probable fiduciary abuse. Porter. Motion to void contested transfer pending judicial confirmation, effective immediately. 3 yes votes. Then the fourth. Additionally, Porter continued, all related development permits and applications are frozen. Matter referred to District Attorney and Adult Protective Enforcement. Victor half laughed, half choked. "You can't bankrupt me over paperwork." Kells, Bluebank counsel, was already gathering files like they were contaminated. "For the record," he said into his mic, clipped and cold, "Bluebank reserves all rights against seller for material misrepresentation and indemnity recovery." Victor turned on him. "You knew the risks." Kells didn't look back. "We knew your representations." 2 sheriff's deputies stepped toward respondent table when Victor shoved his chair hard enough it skidded. Pike grabbed his arm and hissed, "Sit down now." He didn't. He swung toward Grandma instead. "Tell them this is your fault, Eleanor. Tell them she poisoned you." Grandma rose slowly, gripping the table edge. Her voice was thin but clear. "You poisoned this house," she said. "Get away from me." The whole chamber heard it. Victor's face collapsed inward, rage first, then disbelief, as if the room had violated a private script. He took 1 step toward her, and a deputy moved between them. "Sir, you need to step back." He jerked free and spat at me. "You think this is over. Criminal referral isn't conviction." "I know," I said. "I work cases after referrals. I'll see you there too." That did it. Pike muttered something about self-incrimination and dragged him toward the side door while cameras tracked the retreat. In the gallery, Cousins stared at the floor. Trustee Hollis slipped out before reporters could corner him. Renee crossed to Grandma and knelt beside her, sobbing apologies into her lap. Grandma touched her hair with a shaking hand, not absolving, just present. My phone buzzed non-stop. Media, work, strangers. But I ignored all of it until board counsel handed me the stamped emergency order. Thick paper, black ink, seal impression deep enough to feel with my thumb. Ms. Carson, he said quietly. Possession enforcement is stayed. Effective now. I nodded, and only then felt my knees threatening to give. Outside the chamber, rain had started. Summer rain, fast and warm, making the courthouse steps shine like wet slate. Reporters clustered under umbrellas calling my name. I gave one statement, no performance. Today's decision protects an elder resident and preserves due process. The record will speak for itself. Then I stepped away before anyone could ask about family. Daniel met me at the bottom of the stairs with Grandma's cardigan over his arm and that look on his face like he'd been holding his breath for a week. He didn't ask if we won. He could read it in my posture. You standing? He asked softly. Barely. Lean on me anyway. I did. An hour later, we were back at the hospital to complete discharge properly, this time with the board order in hand. The same nurse who had blocked me at triage scanned the new paperwork and said, Ms. Carson, you're listed primary contact now under protective occupancy, not Triumph. Relief so deep it felt like vertigo. Grandma came out in a wheelchair, blanket over her knees, irritation returning with strength. If one more person calls me dear without asking my name, I'm throwing this pudding cup, she muttered. I laughed for the first time in days. Welcome back. At the house, code enforcement posted a temporary occupant protection notice on the file, and a locksmith changed every exterior lock while Daniel stood watch on the porch. We kept one old brass key with the blue ribbon and hung it by the kitchen doorway where Grandma could touch it each morning. By evening, consequences were already ricocheting. Bluebank released a public statement disavowing the transaction and terminating all engagement related to the Carson parcel due to seller misrepresentation. Victor's brokerage called to demand return of commission advances. The county recorder emailed confirmation that the deed record now carried a bold red contest flag linked to the board findings. My supervisor called after dinner. HR reviewed. No policy violation. You're reinstated effective tomorrow. Thank you. A pause. For what it's worth, clean work under fire. I sat at Grandma's table staring at that sentence after we hung up. Clean work under fire. It sounded less like praise than diagnosis. At 9:14 p.m, DA Intake requested full exhibit transfer and offered next morning investigator interview. I accepted, then closed my laptop and just listened. To rain tapping the porch roof, to Grandma and Renee talking low in the den, to Daniel rinsing teacups in the sink like he had on day one. The crisis clock had stopped. In its place was something stranger. Open space. It scared me almost as much as the fight. Later, after Grandma fell asleep and Renee left through the side door with red eyes and a promise to come back with breakfast, Daniel and I sat on the back porch steps. The yard smelled like wet earth and honeysuckle. No sirens, no calls, no courthouse echo. He handed me a mug of tea and kept his own untouched. Can we talk without tactics? He asked. I huffed a tired laugh. I don't know if I remember how. Try. I wrapped both hands around the mug. I was afraid in that room, not of Victor yelling, of freezing, of opening my mouth and hearing everyone's version of me come out instead of mine. He nodded. I know. I also hated how much I needed you there. The words came out rougher than intended. I've built my whole adult life on being the competent one. Need feels like liability. Daniel looked out at the dark yard before answering. Can I be honest, ugly too? Please. When deputies knocked, I went straight back to convoy review in my head. Same adrenaline, same thought. I missed something and now people get hurt. I wanted to fix everything fast so I didn't have to feel that. I turned toward him. You didn't miss anything. I know that here, he said, touching his temple, then his chest. Not always here. We sat with that. He exhaled hard. At the hearing, when Victor pointed at you, I wanted to vault that table, not metaphorically. Despite everything, I smiled. I noticed your jaw. Courtney, I love you. Not your composure, not your resume. You. And I don't always know where to put the fear that comes with loving someone who runs into fire on purpose. My throat tightened. I run into paperwork fires. He gave me a look. You know what I mean? I do. I set the mug down carefully. I love you too, and I'm sorry I turned you into support staff in your own relationship. He blinked. What? I keep assigning you tasks when I'm scared. Hold this binder, make that call, stand here. Useful things, so I don't have to say, I need you close because I'm falling apart. Something in his face softened all at once. Then say that. I swallowed. I needed you close because I was falling apart. He leaned in, foreheads touching. Thank you. We stayed like that a long moment, breathing the same air. Then he said, quieter, the wedding. Do you still want the big club hall? All the people who clap when it's easy and vanish when it isn't? I thought of marble floors and champagne spoons and laughter like knives. No, I said. I want vows where truth can fit in the room. Good, because I was prepared to elope in the parking lot with a bored clerk and your grandmother as witness. I laughed, then started crying, sudden and ridiculous. He didn't flinch, just pulled me into him and let me soak his t-shirt while I shook out the last week through my ribs. When I could speak again, I said into his shoulder, I'm scared this fight changed me. It did, he said. It changed me too. For better. He tilted my chin up. For truer. He kissed me then. Slow, steady, no urgency to prove anything. A promise, not a rescue. When we pulled apart, he reached into his pocket and held out my engagement ring. I had taken it off before the hearing because my fingers were swelling and I couldn't stand the symbolism of pretty things while everything burned. I kept it in my pocket all day, he said. Not because I thought you'd run, because I wanted you to choose it again after. I held out my hand. I'm choosing. He slid it back on, and this time the weight felt earned. 3 mornings later, the courtroom for DA intake smelled like old paper and floor polish. Victor stood at defense table in wrinkled cuffs, glaring at everyone and no one while charges were read. Forgery in the second degree, attempted unlawful conveyance, elder financial exploitation, false filing. He muttered political theatre under his breath. The judge heard and told him to save commentary for counsel. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The record was moving on its own now. That afternoon, at Grandma's house, we held a very different kind of meeting around the same kitchen table where the eviction notice had first landed. Present, Grandma, me, Daniel, an independent elder law attorney named Priya Nandakumar, and a licensed fiduciary trustee, Marcus Bell. Priya spread documents in neat stacks. Mrs. Carson, this trust keeps you as lifetime beneficiary and resident. Any future property sale requires your independent counsel's written approval and 2 non-family external witnesses. No single relative can execute on your behalf. Grandma peered over her glasses. Can one of those witnesses be my hairdresser? She misses nothing. Priya smiled. Honestly, that's the kind of witness I like. We all laughed, light and real. Grandma signed slowly but firmly, not rushed, not sedated, not cornered. Daniel and Marcus witnessed. I countersigned as successor advocate with conflict limits clearly written. When we finished, Priya handed Grandma a copy in a blue folder. Your house stays yours, she said. Grandma pressed her palm to the folder like it was warm. That evening, Daniel and I hosted dinner in our apartment. No marble, no speeches, just roast chicken, green beans, and a pie from the bakery because neither of us had energy left for pastry heroics. Grandma sat at the head of the table by choice. Renee brought iced tea and an apology casserole she didn't stop apologizing for. Halfway through dinner, Daniel stood and tapped his water glass gently with a spoon. I tensed on instinct, then caught myself and smiled. No ambush toast, he said. Just one line. He looked at me, eyes bright and tired and utterly open. To Courtney Carson, he said, who never confuses silence with weakness. The room went quiet, but it was a different quiet from the officers' club, a quiet that made space instead of taking it. Grandma lifted her glass. And to people who read the fine print before they sign. Laughter, warm this time. After plates were cleared, I stepped onto the balcony for air. The city hummed below, ordinary and alive. Daniel joined me, shoulder to shoulder. Town's talking, he said. Let them. He bumped my arm. Your name means something different now. I watched lights flicker in distant windows. It means exactly what I say it means. Inside, through the open door, I could hear Grandma telling Renee where Grandpa hid cash during hurricane season, and both of them arguing over whether that counted as financial planning. I touched the ring on my finger, then the small brass key with the blue ribbon now on my keychain. In the club hall months earlier, a glass had rung and everyone laughed while my home disappeared on paper. Now, at my own table, no one laughed at me. They listened.